Episode 3 of 19. Self-awareness is not an identity, it's a liability. What happens when you see too much and can't unsee it? Self-awareness isn't enlightenment. Self-awareness? It's exhaustion when you're the only one doing the emotional math. This episode? A reckoning for the ones carrying too much insight and too little connection. You think you're self-aware, both internally and externally? That's not a badge. It is a burden. This isn't a trophy episode. This is for the ones who know that seeing clearly doesn't always feel good, because now you see everything. You've done the work. You've read the books, sat in silence, dismantled the masks. You can track your thoughts, your wounds, your triggers in real time. But here's the catch. You can't unsee what others ignore. And it's starting to feel more like a curse than a gift. Self-awareness doesn't make you enlightened. It makes you responsible for your impact, your tone, your unspoken motives. And when you're around people who aren't aware, you carry the emotional labor of the whole damn room. This isn't about being better. This is about learning to live when you can see the strings behind every social dance, and how to stop trying to manage everyone else's blind spots. If awareness is your prison, this is your permission to stop trying to make sense to people who don't even hear the music. You don't need a smaller truth. You need a bigger solitude. Section 1. The myth of self-awareness as Ascension. They'll tell you that being self-aware is a gift, that it means you've leveled up, that it makes you better. But here's the truth. Self-awareness, true self-awareness, both internal and external, just makes you tired. Not because the insight isn't real, but because the performance around it is exhausting. Culture sells the awakened one like a movie role. Stoic, soft-eyed, speaking in metaphors, unbothered by ignorance, floating just above the mess. Bullshit. Real awareness doesn't feel like levitation. It feels like drowning in signals no one else even notices. You're not floating, you're tracking. Every word, every flinch, every dodge disguised as a smile. You didn't ask for this role. You didn't audition. But the moment you saw the patterns, you couldn't unsee them. And now, you can't even enjoy a goddamn group chat without analyzing subtext and wondering who's projecting. Let's talk about the influencer's self-awareness trap. It's seductive. Package your pain, monetize your insight, make being reflective into a brand. You stop evolving and start performing clarity. And that curated image of calm? It's just repression with a ring light. They say awareness is power, but they don't tell you that awareness without depth just becomes strategy. A way to seem enlightened enough to avoid criticism, but not honest enough to dismantle your own defenses. And here's the kicker. Awareness does not equal immunity to ego. And I will repeat that. Awareness, self-awareness, true self-awareness, both internal and external self-awareness, does not equal immunity to ego. The ego doesn't disappear because you can name your triggers. It adapts. It evolves into the voice that says, "I'm just being honest," while you weaponize your insight. The ego cloaks itself in analysis, in tone checking, in over-explaining. It hides behind your wisdom and tells you you've transcended, even as you quietly judge the ones who haven't caught up. This isn't enlightenment. It's ego in a therapist's chair, taking notes on everyone but itself. Section 2. What real self-awareness does to you. Let's drop the fantasy. Self-awareness doesn't make you a sage. It makes you sensitive as hell. You don't just hear what people say, you feel what they're avoiding. You don't just notice tone, you absorb motive. You don't just see behavior, you forecast patterns. You become the human equivalent of a polygraph in a world full of people still lying to themselves. You feel everything. Tone, microsignals, word choices. You catch the pause before the apology, the eye roll behind the compliment, the tension in the joke that wasn't really a joke. You track it all, even when you wish you couldn't. Not because you're trying to overthink, but because your nervous system has become a tuning fork for authenticity. And most people are off-key. You predict patterns no one else registers. You know the ending of the conversation before they even say the first sentence. You know who's going to ghost, who's going to spiral, who's not ready for the truth they keep saying they want. And you're rarely wrong. Because being right doesn't feel good anymore. It feels isolating. Because it is isolating. Because no one wants to be told the train is going off the rails, especially when they just bought a first-class ticket. You start managing your own ego and everyone else's in the room. You hold back, you modulate, you soften, because you know what it costs to be misunderstood. You calculate impact before you speak. You pre-process the reaction before you finish the sentence. You parent your own clarity so no one gets hurt by that clarity. But no one notices the labor. They just say you're calm or well-spoken, when really, you're bleeding effort into every interaction. And here's where it bites you. You become hyper-accountable, not just for your behavior, but for how everyone else feels around you. You absorb their discomfort like it's your job. You think, if I were truly healed, this wouldn't be happening. So you over-own, over-apologize, over-adjust, until resentment starts whispering in your ear, hey, you're doing everyone's emotional math but your own. And you are. Because self-awareness taught you to scan for triggers, but no one taught you how to stop cleaning up after them. Section 3. The isolation it creates. People think self-awareness makes you better at relationships, but the truth? It makes you lonelier in them. Because when you're truly self-aware, both internally and externally, you don't just understand your patterns, you understand why no one else sees theirs. And that kind of vision, it creates distance, even from the people you love. Let's get really clear on this. Internal self-awareness is knowing your own motives, patterns, and contradictions. External self-awareness is knowing how you impact others, how you're perceived, received, and misunderstood. Most people only have one of these at best. A handful of people have both. But when you do have both, you start to realize just how much translating you're doing all the fucking time. You're harder to surprise. You see things coming. The shift in tone that signals a lie. The subtle withdrawal before a discard. The micro behavior that predicts a betrayal. You read between the lines instinctively, and that means most plot twists don't really land. You're not jaded, you're just fluent. And that fluency, it keeps the world from catching you off guard, but it also robs you of the magic other people get to feel when they're naive enough to believe the best. You struggle with small talk, not because you're arrogant, but because it feels like faking a foreign language you're no longer fluent in. You can smile, nod, say the thing, but inside, you're scanning the gaps, the deflections, the performance, the projections. And pretending not to notice, that drains you faster than silence ever could. You get exhausted translating your reality into something digestible. Try explaining your thought process to someone who hasn't done the work. It's like translating poetry into math. You start self-editing before you speak. You dilute your clarity so it doesn't offend. You bend your words until they're palatable, not truthful. And even then, they still don't get it. So, you go quiet. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you're tired of being misheard by people who think they're listening. You long for contact, but can't tolerate most people's first draft selves. You crave depth, not intensity, not drama, just depth. But most people are still operating from their unexamined draft, still mistaking their instincts for truth, still outsourcing their worth to feedback loops, still defending illusions they haven't even questioned yet. And when you try to connect, you either shrink yourself or you trigger their defenses. Either way, you're left feeling like too much for the surface dwellers and too alone to keep swimming at your depth without a tether. Self-awareness isn't lonely because it makes you superior or something. It's lonely because you've seen way too much, and most people are still trying not to. Section 4, where the identity trap happens. At first, true self-awareness feels like liberation. You've stepped out of delusion. You've faced your shadows. You've earned your clarity. But then, without noticing, you start to need being the one who sees. And that's when the trap snaps shut. You start to identify as the aware one. It becomes your lens, your shield, your role. You're the grounded one, the deep one, the person people come to for insight, for clarity, for mirrors. And that identity, it feels like truth, but it's still ego, just in a different outfit. Because here's the thing, the moment you start defending your self-awareness, you're no longer practicing it. You've turned it into armor. You've mistaken awareness for arrival. And now you're performing clarity instead of staying curious. You become the mirror for others, but forget who's holding one for you. You reflect like a pro. You can name people's blind spots, wounds, and projections with surgical precision. But who's naming yours? Who's gently interrupting your righteousness? Who do you trust enough to say, hey, you're using insight to avoid intimacy right now? You're so used to being the one who sees, you stopped being seen, and you didn't even notice. You start confusing distance for clarity. You don't just pull back to regulate, you pull back to control the narrative. You think, hey, I'm just protecting my peace. But really, you're avoiding the vulnerability of not having all the answers. Because being close means being messy. And if your identity is built around being the one with awareness, messiness feels like a failure. No one gets me becomes your emotional loop. You tell yourself it's because you're deep, or rare, or evolved. And hey, maybe you are. But no one gets me is often code for, I've stopped letting anyone close enough to try to get me. Because closeness means reflection. And real reflection might show you the places where your self-awareness has quietly calcified into superiority. So let's name this clearly. Self-awareness isn't who you are. It's a practice. It should make you softer, not sharper. More interruptible, not less interruptible. But the moment it becomes your badge, it stops being your bridge. Section 5, What to do when you can't unsee. Let's start here. You're not wrong for noticing. You're not broken for being the one who sees. But clarity without capacity, that's a recipe for burnout. If you can't unsee the patterns, the pain, the projections, then it's time to learn how to carry what you see differently. Stop expecting people to meet you in places they haven't even mapped. You've done the terrain work. You've walked through your own fire, mapped your shadows, learned the language of nuance. And now you want that company at that altitude. And I get it. I'm the same way. I want those people. But something I've had to realize is that most people, they're still on the ground floor, reading the brochure for healing and thinking it's the same as the hike. You see this in meme culture everywhere. It's not arrogance to see that, it's reality. And expecting them to meet you there will only lead to resentment. Let them be where they are and go where you need to be. Create spaces where depth isn't forced, it's assumed. You don't need a circle of clones, but you do need resonance. Places where you don't have to preface every single thought, where silence isn't awkward but honored, where the air is thick with honesty, not tension disguised as calm. You don't have to explain your wiring in every room, but you do need rooms where your wiring isn't a liability. Make those rooms, find those people, guard that space. Embrace solitude as a forge, not a punishment. Solitude isn't proof that you're unlovable. It's proof that you're finally done performing for connection. If no one's reflecting you clearly right now, let the quiet sharpen your edges instead of softening your standards. Sit in it, burn in it. Let the silence become a crucible instead of a coffin. Because true self-knowledge doesn't just make you lonely, it makes you solid. Practice being with people without fixing them. This one's hard, because once you see the strings, you want to help untangle them, because of course you do, because you are untangled. But not everyone wants untangling. Some people need to trip and fall a few more times before they're even close to being ready. And others, they like their knots. They love their knots. They do not want those knots untangled. So stop trying to be the scissors and be the witness. Let people learn their own math. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do. You don't need to make your awareness smaller. You just need to stop setting yourself on fire to light a path for people who still prefer the dark. Section 6. Choose the silence that feeds you. There's a kind of silence that starves you, makes you feel erased, like your voice doesn't matter. But there's another kind, a silence that isn't absence, it's protection. A quiet that holds you instead of hollowing you. Choose that one. Because here's the truth, self-awareness isn't a personality. It's not an aesthetic, it's not your thing. It's a tool, a lens, a liability if you wear it like armor. Insight doesn't make you invincible. It just makes you accountable. And if you don't know how to carry that accountability without bleeding, you'll resent the very clarity you once prayed for. Because other people, they're not going to see that clarity, and they're going to use your own insight against you. So let yourself stop explaining. Stop translating. Stop trying to sound reasonable to people who think your depth is a threat. You don't owe anyone your clarity. You don't have to water down your knowing to keep others comfortable. You don't have to apologize for seeing through the noise. But you do have to protect your signal. Because not everyone is ready to hear it. Most people aren't. Not everyone will treat it with any kind of reverence. Some will try to use it against you. Some will use it against you. Some will nod and clap and still not understand. Some will call it too much because they've never even sat with their own truth long enough to recognize yours. Let them. Let them misinterpret. Let them stay on the surface. You don't need a smaller truth. You need a bigger solitude. One that feeds you. One that reminds you who you are when no one's watching. One that doesn't echo your words, but reflects your integrity back to you without distortion. You just need to learn how to carry your awareness without bleeding on people who can't see the wound. And maybe that's not peace, but it's the beginning of it.